The headline version of baseball is for everyone. This isn't that. Streak Plot Scout goes below the surface. The 40-man decisions, the prospect ETAs, the draft implications hiding inside yesterday's transactions. Built for the people who understand that the game is won before it's played. Let's get into it. The most important number in the Michael McGreevy story isn't his ERA. It's the gap between his ERA and what the contact quality says his ERA should be. And more specifically, how much of that gap is sustainable, how much is noise, and what the Cardinals front office is going to do about it before the market figures it out. Let me build this properly, because this arc has layers that a surface-level read misses entirely. McGreevy is sitting at a 2.40 ERA over 56 innings and 10 starts. His xERA is 5.85. That's a 3.45 run gap, and over 56 innings, that's not a small sample quirk. That's a meaningful signal about the disconnect between results and underlying contact quality. His FIP is 4.23. His WHIP is 0.99. On the surface, this looks like a guy having a breakout year. The underlying metrics say something very different. The contact quality numbers are where this gets uncomfortable. Hard hit rate against, 41.1%. Barrel rate against, 10.7%. Average exit velocity against, 89.0 miles per hour. Here's the honest assessment of those numbers. 41.1% hard hit rate is elevated. 10+% barrel rate is elevated. These are not the contact quality numbers of a pitcher who is genuinely suppressing damage. These are the numbers of a pitcher who is allowing dangerous contact and not being punished for it yet. Strand rate is doing a lot of work here. BABIP luck is doing a lot of work here. And when those normalize, and they will normalize, the ERA will move toward the underlying metrics, not the other way around. Now let's add the career context, because this is where the McGreevy story gets genuinely interesting, rather than just being a simple sell-high narrative. He has historically beaten his xERA. Career average gap is negative 0.92 runs, meaning he has consistently outperformed his expected ERA by just under a run over his career. Some pitchers have legitimate skills that allow them to sustain ERA to xERA gaps. Elite sequencing, strong strand rate management, good athleticism, and limiting extra base hits on contact. McGreevy appears to have some version of this skill set. That's real. But here's the math problem. His current gap is 3.45 runs below xERA. Even if you give him full credit for his career baseline skill, call it a 0.92 sustained advantage, you're still looking at a pitcher who is 2.53 runs of ERA better than his adjusted expectation. That excess evaporates. It always does. His velocity tells its own story. McGreevy is sitting 91.4 miles per hour this season, down 1.6 miles per hour from last year. That's not a number to dismiss. Velocity trends down over the course of a season for most pitchers. That's normal. But a 1.5+ mile per hour drop year over year in May is a flag. It suggests either a mechanical adjustment that may not hold, a delivery change that's buying command at the cost of stuff, or the early edges of something physical. The chase rate at 28.4% is below average. Hitters aren't expanding the zone because they don't have to. His stuff isn't generating the kind of swing decisions that would make the contact quality numbers feel more sustainable. 6 quality starts is a real number, but quality starts at a 92 pitch average with declining velocity and elevated contact quality is not the same thing as 6 quality starts from a pitcher generating genuine weak contact. The walk-year framing is critical here. McGreevy is earning $0.8 million this season. He is in a walk year by contract structure. This is the performance window where the Cardinals either use his surface ERA as organizational currency, trade bait, extension leverage, or roll security, or they watch that window slam shut in August when regression arrives right on schedule. The 3.45 run ERA to xERA gap is not a baseball secret anymore. Front offices around the league are looking at the same StatCast data. The sell-high window is not infinite. It exists right now in late May when his ERA is under 2.50 and the mainstream narrative hasn't caught up to the underlying profile. The Cardinals' luxury tax picture matters for how they approach this. They have $129.4 million of space. Replacement is financially viable. This is not a situation where they have to keep a struggling pitcher in the rotation for budget reasons. That means if they move McGreevy as part of a trade package, they have the financial capacity to absorb a replacement. The question is whether the front office wants to make that move, or whether they are betting on McGreevy's career baseline skill to keep some version of this performance real through the second half. What should the Cardinals be watching? 3 things over the next 30 days. First, velocity. If the 91.4 average drops another tick into the 90 to 91 range, that's a pitcher whose stuff profile is shifting in ways that the contact quality numbers will eventually reflect more severely. Second, strand rate. Right now, McGreevy is stranding runners at an elevated clip. As his strand rate normalizes toward league average, the ERA will creep. Third, the hard hit rate trend by start. If you look at his last 4 or 5 outings and the hard hit rate against is stable or rising, the regression timeline compresses. The 40-man conversation here is actually straightforward. McGreevy is on the 40-man. He's not a prospect decision. He's an active roster asset. The question is what asset he is. Right now, the Cardinals are sitting on a pitcher with a 2.40 ERA who is generating the contact quality of a pitcher with a 5.85 ERA. If they believe in the career baseline skill gap, they hold him and accept that the ERA settles somewhere in the 3.80 to 4.20 range. Still useful, still rotation worthy. If they are aggressive sellers of narrative surplus, they move him now as part of a package where his ERA does real work as a selling point. The 30-day watch is simple. Monitor the velocity, track the strand rate, and watch whether any contending teams start making calls. The Cardinals' $129 million in luxury tax space tells you they aren't afraid to move pieces and absorb cost. McGreevy's ERA is a negotiating chip that has a shelf life measured in weeks, not months. The front office that moves first on this information wins. The one that waits for the ERA to normalize absorbs the loss. The story here isn't the ERA. The story is what the ERA reveals about a career that has been quietly unraveling for 3 years, and what that means for a franchise trying to stay relevant in an AL West that isn't waiting for anyone. Lance McCullers Jr. is in the final year of a 5-year deal worth $17 million per season. That contract was signed on the assumption that McCullers was a mid-rotation stalwart with a wipeout curveball and enough durability to eat innings for a contending club. The version of McCullers the Astros signed in 2022 doesn't exist anymore. That's not a hot take. That's what 11 years of data is telling us. Let's build the career picture first because this is an AF2 arc and the career arc is the spine of everything else. McCullers made his debut in 2015. He's been one of baseball's most fascinating and frustrating arms since then. Electric stuff, recurring durability issues, and a peripherals profile that always seemed to promise more than the injury history allowed him to deliver. His career ERA sits at 4.14. That number already tells you something. This was never a frontline ace on the finished product side. He was always a high-variance, high-upside arm whose value was tied to 2 things: his ability to miss bats with elite curveball shape and his ability to stay on the mound. Neither of those conditions holds right now. The HR9 trend is the thread I want you to pull on. Career average, 0.92. Last season, north of 1.5. This season, 1.61 over 39.1 innings. That is not a blip. That is a 3-year climb, and it is happening against the backdrop of what StatCast is telling us about the contact quality he's allowing. Hard hit rate against sits at 50.5%. Average exit velocity against is 91.5 miles per hour. Barrel rate against is 8.6%. Those are numbers that say hitters are squaring McCullers up with real authority, and the ball is going over fences at a rate that is more than 70% above his career norm. Now here is where the ERA versus xERA gap becomes important for the deeper read. His ERA is 6.86. His xERA is 4.39. His FIP is 3.96. The surface number looks catastrophic, but the underlying metrics are saying there's some regression to the mean happening in the wrong direction. He's been unlucky on some stranded runners, and the home runs are inflating the ERA beyond what the full contact profile would predict. But here's the thing. Even if you take the FIP and the xERA at face value, you're still looking at a 4.39 to 3.96 pitcher in his age 32 season, on pace for maybe 75 or 80 innings, with a HR/9 that keeps climbing. That's not a rotation anchor. That's a middle-of-the-rotation question mark who is very expensive. The 40-man picture for Houston matters here. The Astros have $3.3 million of luxury tax space. They are not trading deadline buyers with a blank check. Their playoff odds sit at 18.4% as of today, which puts them firmly in the category of a team that knows it needs things to go right in a hurry, or this window closes quietly. McCullers is eating rotation slots and dollars in a year where both are precious. What does the roster construction decision look like from here? McCullers is not going to be non-tendered mid-season. That's not how this works with a guaranteed contract. He finishes out this deal. But the question the front office is asking right now is whether he can give them something useful in the second half, or whether the org needs to make an internal move that effectively removes him from meaningful rotation decisions. He's thrown 18.3 innings over the last 30 days at 115 pitches per start. He's not being managed conservatively. The Astros are pitching him like a starter because they need him to be a starter. 2 quality starts on the season. That's it. The walkier framing matters for the roster picture too, even though the contract implications belong more squarely in a different conversation. What this season is doing to McCullers' market value for 2027 free agency is eroding it in real time. And the Astros' leverage here is actually negative. They need him to perform because their rotation depth doesn't give them an easy alternative, but they can't count on him to perform because the underlying data says the results aren't coming. That's a tough spot to be in when you're sitting at 18.4% playoff odds in late May. The 40-man watch for the next 30 days is this. Houston has a few arms in the upper minors who will start to matter if McCullers continues to deteriorate. Pay attention to how the Astros handle his next 3 or 4 starts. If the ERA stays north of 6 and the hard hit rate doesn't improve, there's a roster conversation coming that involves either stretching a long reliever or accelerating a prospect timeline. Because this version of Lance McCullers is not solving a rotation problem, he is being one. The deeper question the Astros have to answer by August is whether they are sellers who acknowledge the window is closing, or whether they are buyers who commit to a second-half run knowing their number 3 starter is posting a 6.5 ERA. McCullers' contract year is the most telling data point in that decision tree, because if he finishes this season at a 5.50 ERA with under 80 innings pitched, there is no meaningful free agent market waiting for him, and Houston knew that risk when they needed him most. Watch the next 3 starts, watch the hard hit rate, and watch the Astros transaction wire, because the day they make a move that signals they've stopped counting on McCullers, you'll know the front office has accepted what the numbers have been saying for 2 years. When Corbin Burnes went down for Tommy John surgery, the Arizona Diamondbacks didn't just lose a pitcher. They lost the structural load-bearing element of a rotation that was already managing durability questions, and they triggered a prospect timeline decision that has real 40-man consequences and real organizational implications for how this franchise navigates a contention window that is very much alive. Let's be precise about what Tommy John surgery means from a roster construction standpoint before we get to the prospect layer, because the depth picture matters enormously here. Burnes is on the 60-day IL. That is not a soft designation. A 60-day IL for Tommy John surgery means you are not planning around a second-half return. You are planning around a 12 to 18-month recovery arc, which means the Diamondbacks are constructing their rotation for the remainder of 2026 and the beginning of 2027 without him. At 47.2% playoff odds, Arizona is a genuine contender in the NL West. This is not a rebuilding club absorbing a development setback. This is an organization with real postseason ambitions making an emergency rotation decision in late May. Now let's talk about the durability context on Burnes himself, because it matters for how the org plans around his eventual return. 4 of his 8 MLB seasons have featured significantly below average innings totals. That's a pattern, not a coincidence. The front office in Arizona knew they were managing a pitcher who had durability questions when they made their roster decisions. The Tommy John diagnosis doesn't change the long-term projection as much as it accelerates the timeline of a conversation the org was already having internally. Burnes' 0.0 WAR on the season before the injury tells you the production value being replaced here is not what his name suggests. The replacement task is manageable, but only if the org makes smart decisions about who fills those starts. Now here's the part of this arc that matters most for the 40-man picture in the prospect pipeline: Daniel Egan. Egan is the 8th-ranked prospect in the Arizona system, carrying a future value of 45. He is currently at AA. His projected ETA was 2027, but that projection assumed a healthy rotation above him, a normal developmental cadence, and no emergency demand for starting pitching at the major league level. Burnes' Tommy John surgery has eliminated at least 2 of those 3 conditions. Let's grade what Egan brings, because a 45 FV arm with a 2027 ETA getting accelerated into a contention conversation deserves a serious evaluation rather than a reflexive call-up narrative. His fastball grades 50 on the present scale with 80 grade projection ceiling. The 93 to 95 range with downhill plane, that framing tells you something important about how he generates his best movement. Downhill fastball shape is a function of extension, arm slot, and release point efficiency. When it's working, it plays up beyond the raw velo because it gets on hitters faster and generates more sink or ride depending on the axis. When it's inconsistent, particularly at the upper minors level where hitters are better at identifying and attacking elevated velocity without late movement, it becomes a pitch that lives on the fringes of the zone and gets punished by quality AA bats. His command grade's 45. That is below average. That is the number I want you to sit with because it is the single biggest reason why a 2027 ETA was already an optimistic projection rather than a guarantee. A starter with below average command at AA is not ready to step into a major league rotation for a contending club and consistently log quality starts. The fastball projection is real. The command profile says the development work isn't done. You can have 93 to 95 with good downhill shape and still get beaten regularly at the big league level if you're not locating it, because big league hitters will sit on the elevated version and do real damage. So here's the tension the Diamondbacks front office is navigating right now. They have a contention window. 47.2% playoff odds is not a mirage. And they have a prospect whose ceiling is legitimate, but whose current command grade says he's not ready. Accelerating Egan's timeline serves 2 masters. It fills a rotation slot that genuinely needs filling, and it gives Egan exposure to big league environments earlier than planned. But it also risks burning a pitcher in a context where he may not succeed, which has both developmental and service time consequences. Let's talk about the 40-man math. Egan coming up requires a 40-man move. The Diamondbacks need to assess what their 40-man looks like right now, who is on the bubble, whether there are any DFA candidates to clear the path, and whether the org prefers to bring Egan up to AAA first as a bridge step or accelerate him directly to the active roster. The fact that his ETA was already 2027 and he's currently at AA suggests the org views him as legitimately close without being quite there. A AAA assignment would be the responsible developmental step. But if the rotation situation deteriorates over the next 2 to 4 weeks and the alternatives are worse, a big league call-up becomes the pragmatic choice, regardless of where the development checklist says he should be. There is also a service time clock consideration here that the org will be managing carefully. A May call-up versus a June or July call-up has real arbitration and free agency implications. If the Diamondbacks genuinely believe Egan has a big league future on their roster, they will be thinking hard about whether accelerating him now costs them a year of team control they'd rather preserve. The standard calculation applies. If he gets called up before the service time threshold and stays up, he accrues a full year. If they manage his call-up timing carefully, they may be able to delay the clock without significantly impacting their 2026 playoff chances. The other dimension the org has to consider is the bullpen bridge option. Before Egan gets called up, the Diamondbacks will almost certainly stretch a long reliever or deploy a spot starter strategy for the next several turns through the rotation. That buys the org 2 to 3 weeks to evaluate whether Egan is performing at AAA, assuming they send him there, or whether the in-house alternatives are sufficient. Watch who takes Burns' first turn in the rotation. That decision will tell you a lot about whether the front office views this as a temporary bridge situation or an extended rotation problem. The 30-day watch is layered. First, does Egan get a AAA assignment immediately? And if so, what does his command look like against more advanced competition? A 45 command grade at AA sometimes plays better or worse against AAA lineups, depending on whether the zone management is the limiting factor or the secondary pitch development. Second, what does the Diamondbacks transaction wire look like over the next 2 weeks? Any 40-man clearing move, a DFA, an option, a trade, signals the org is preparing a roster path for Egan or another arm. Third, what happens to the Diamondbacks' rotation ERA without Burns? If the remaining starters hold the ship together, the org has more flexibility on Egan's timeline. If the rotation starts bleeding runs, the call-up conversation accelerates, regardless of where the development checklist says he should be. Arizona is a contender that just lost a starting pitcher to a surgery with an 18-month recovery arc. They have a prospect with a projectable fastball and a below-average command grade. That combination, contention urgency plus development incompleteness, is where organizations make mistakes that cost them both in the short term and in the prospect's long-term arc. The Diamondbacks front office has the skill and the resources to navigate this correctly. The next 30 days will tell you whether they are doing it the right way or reacting to the emergency. That's the read on the day. Same game, deeper read, back tomorrow. This is Streak Plot Scout. Greatness is never random.